Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Megan Messerly. It's Tuesday, September 2nd.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. The Playbook Podcast is back. I am back, and Megan Messerly is back. How you doing, Megan?
I'm so great. It's so good to have you back behind the mic.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Did you have a wonderful Labor Day, or did you spend it all working like me?
It's always a little bit of work, a little bit of play. You know, we try to balance it where we can.
It doesn't feel like the end of summer to me. It feels right like the middle of it. But yeah, I'm here for it. Driving the day today, well, basically politics is back, Megan. Not that it really went away, but Congress is back. But more importantly, President Donald Trump is back. We're expecting to actually see him in the Oval Office today for the first time in a whole week or something like that.
Yeah, first time in a week.
First time in a week, which is pretty normal for lots of presidents, but pretty unusual for this president. He's going to be making an announcement of some description, something to do with defense, we are told, in the Oval Office this afternoon. But he's been pretty active in social media. He's been making announcements and stuff. But because we haven't actually seen him, this seems to have triggered something of a frenzy on social media, or certainly liberal social media, Megan, about his whereabouts. Have you seen this? Have you come across this on your social media feed?
I have, yeah. It really felt like it was growing, and I woke up Saturday morning and it had exploded overnight, and it felt like every post on X I was seeing was speculating about his whereabouts.
Basically, people speculating about his health and is he still alive? Because we haven't seen the president for a whole few days. We get the pool reports, right? We know there are journalists literally following this guy around. They're seeing him getting in his car. He's basically been playing golf, as far as I can tell.
Yes. Over the weekend, he played several rounds of golf. I will note the last day that we saw the president at a public event, he held a 3-hour and 17-minute long cabinet meeting, so a lot of folks speculating about his health. I don't know if I have that kind of stamina. That's like anyone who sat through an hour-long meeting is really struggling by the end of it.
It's such a good point. And obviously compared to his predecessor, who very much did hide away from the cameras, and now we know why. I mean, it's reasonable to talk about Donald Trump's health, right? The guy is over 79 years old. My parents are 79 years old. They have lots of health problems. That happens to you when you're 79 years old. It's kind of weird if he didn't have any health problems at that age. So I think it's a legitimate point of conversation. But my goodness, they get themselves into frenzy. People give the right, almost as if they're the main conspiracy theories on social media. It hasn't felt like that the last few days.
No, it's really felt like the left has really just seized on this. And, I know a lot of folks on the right have been pointing out sort of the irony. These are a lot of the folks that didn't want to talk about Joe Biden's health. And we all saw how that played out. So certainly a fascinating split screen between the presidents here.
You bet. And I've no doubt that when he invites the president to the Oval Office today, he may even be asked about his health. Who knows? There's certainly been enough chat about it. What he wants to talk about is defense. We don't quite know what the announcement is going to be yet. The thing I think we should talk about, Megan, in terms of defense, though, is Ukraine, because after that summit in Alaska, President Trump initially appeared to set a short deadline for Putin to get together with Zelensky, and obviously that just hasn't happened. And we saw Zelensky yesterday talking about that, saying, the deadline has passed, we're no closer to it. I saw some of the European leaders talking about that yesterday as well. Donald Trump seems to have forgotten about that deadline and has sort of extended it a bit by another week or two, but it doesn't feel like this meeting is going to happen. There doesn't appear to be any movement at all, and that really doesn't look good for the president, does it?
No, and there really was this triumphal tone, I think, coming out of Alaska. And we've seen that just gradually grow quieter and quieter to the point now where the president is saying he's not sure a bilateral meeting will happen. He said this in a interview with the Daily Caller that he did on Friday. He said, maybe a trilateral would happen, but seemed to cast out on that bilateral meeting, which just feels like such a change of tune from where we were just a couple of weeks ago.
The Daily Caller put the whole transcript of that interview out yesterday, having released some stories from around it over the weekend. It's a whole hour-long transcript of the interview with Donald Trump. I found it fascinating to read through it, and this is how I spent my Labor Day. But there's lots of interesting things in there if you read the nuance of what the president's saying. And on Ukraine, he was really interesting because you remember how confident he was before the election, before he came back in his second term. I'm going to get this done in a day. He was so sure that he could fix this. And he sort of gets into that in this interview, and he talks about all the other wars. He's claiming he stopped like 6 or 7 wars this year. He says, I thought the easiest one would be this one in a certain way because of relationships. Mm-hmm. He means his relationship with Putin, right? He really believed that. He says, I just felt I knew, but it doesn't seem it's going to get. And then he sort of trails off. It's taking a long time. People are still dying. This is President Trump actually doubting himself and saying, I got this wrong. You don't hear that very often.
No, no. And I think we've seen the way he's talked about his relationship with Putin change over the weeks and months as he has been unable to negotiate the kind of peace that he wants to between Russia and Ukraine. He's very much tempered expectations about that relationship. He talked about this idea of Putin would tell him one thing and then he would go bomb Ukraine the next day, right? That was the turn of phrase he was using for a while. But talking to White House officials, I know he had this belief going in, and this just frames the way he approaches relationships with world leaders. But he really believes that if you get them in a room one-on-one, you can hash this out leader to leader, right? We've talked about this before. This is kind of maybe the opposite way that these kinds of things usually go down, where things are negotiated at a lower level and trickle up to the principals. That's not the way Donald Trump sees these things. And so I think it's been, I don't know if surprise or shock is really the right word, but there were such high expectations, I think, for the White House, for what he thought he could accomplish in Alaska. And now sort of reality is setting in that this conflict is not going to be resolved that easily or quickly, and looks like it's just set to be prolonged even further at this point.
The other thing we'll see today, Megan, in the Oval Office, given it's been a week since anyone's had a chance to throw questions at the president, he'll have to answer for some of the things he's done in the past week. And they've been pretty big stuff, right? The attempt to fire one of the Federal Reserve governors and then the actual firing of the head of the CDC, both those in very quick succession at the back end of last week. Donald Trump trying to assert himself over arms of the government in ways that we've never really seen presidents try to do before. He's obviously going to get asked about those things today. And I assume what we're going to see is a very bullish president insisting he absolutely has the right to do these things and he's absolutely right to do it. But I guess that's to be tested by the courts rather than by him.
Yes, yes. The court is the final arbiter, but I think it'll be fascinating to see. We kind of know his thoughts on the Fed, and he's been talking about interest rates for months now, and I'm sure we'll get another Jay Powell aside, as we usually do when this topic comes up. But I'm curious to see how he talks about the CDC director. He was truthing over the weekend about vaccines, about Operation Warp Speed, about saying he wants to see more details, and really sort of leaning into some of the rhetoric that we've seen from the Make America Healthy Again movement, some of the vaccine skepticism. And this has been a really sort of point of contention between the health secretary and the president on the issues of vaccine, because President Trump, of course, is the one who spearheaded Operation Warp Speed. And so I'm fascinated to see how he addresses that in the Oval today.
He talks about 80-20 issues, doesn't he, where he just knows in his mind completely certainly he's on the right side of public opinion on certain issues. He believes that on immigration, on crime and stuff. This is not that, right? This vaccine skepticism thing being pushed by RFK is much, much fringier than that. And I think this has the potential to be pretty politically explosive if they really start to move ahead in the direction that I'm sure RFK Jr. wants to move now that he's getting his own people in charge at the top of the CDC. It's not necessarily a big vote win for the president.
No. And it's a challenge too. Does he draw a line between the COVID vaccine and other vaccines? Americans have different feelings. Will we see the president draw lines that way? And again, it's hard given that it was his government that put forward Operation Warp Speed. So I'm really interested to see how he navigates that rhetorically.
There'll be plenty of eyes over on Capitol Hill today with Congress returning after its month or so recess. And they're coming back to an absolute, am I allowed to say shitstorm on this podcast? That's certainly what it feels like, because the government is due to shut down in a month's time. And suddenly, with the return of Congress, that is going to come very sharply into clarity. And I feel like we're going to spend an awful lot of September talking about that and whether some sort of deal can be done. These aren't two parties that look in the mood for deal making to me.
No. And it feels like Groundhog Day, another government shutdown, another year. That's kind of where we're at. But there are some of these interesting budgetary underpinnings of this shutdown fight, right? We saw this move from the president last week to do this so-called pocket rescission, clawing back these billions in foreign aid. That is a controversial move among Congress, tests Congress's power of the purse. So there's sort of an interesting layer, I think, on top of some of these budgetary discussions that we haven't seen before.
Yeah. And if they can't get to a point of making some sort of agreement, then, it is going to be a pretty big deal come the start of October. Before all that, though, there's a whole nother thing which is going to kick off this week in Congress, which is the Epstein files, something that I know Washington spent an awful lot of the summer writhing in agony about. This story is coming back with a bang today because two House members are coming forward with a discharge petition that they believe they've got the numbers to get a vote on the floor of the House to release the so-called Epstein files. whether or not they're successful, Megan, it just means people are going to be talking about this story again in a big way, right?
Yep, I just said Groundhog Day, and here we are again. So
Yes,
many Republican lawmakers left for their August recess, hoping that this would quietly slink away, and that is not what we're going to have happen.
Absolutely not. And interesting that the Republican leading the charge on this is Thomas Massie, who's been a real bête noire for Trump. And Trump has been happy to really put the boot into him repeatedly this year. This isn't going to endear him to Trump anymore. But he says he's got the numbers. He reckons he's got enough Republicans to get this onto the floor of House. If so, that's going to be a big moment.
Yeah. And this is the challenge here, is that this is a Republican issue. This is something Republicans have wanted. They have wanted more information on Jeffrey Epstein. And this is what makes it just such a challenging issue for the president.
You bet. While we're talking about members of Congress, we got a big announcement last night that one of the best known Democrats, has been around for an awfully long time, Representative Jerry Nadler, won't be seeking re-election next year. That's a big one, right? I mean, we've heard a lot of these announcements over the last few months as we head towards the midterms, but this is a real changing of the guard moment.
It truly is. Yeah, it was fascinating to see that announcement and some of the discourse around it, which I think is just, what does the changing of the guard look like? And that is still the big question that Democrats are certainly grappling with.
Yeah, he's been one of the leading liberal voices for the Democrats for a very long time. In fact, he was first elected in 1992. What were you doing in 1992, Megan?
I was not alive in 1992.
There we go. All right. He's been in Congress longer than you've been alive. So the other interesting thing about him is that he makes the point that he is now too old to be doing this. He said he looked at what happened with Joe Biden, and it really sort of, I don't force his hand, but made him realize that it is time to rejuvenate the Democratic Party. And of course, that is what a lot of the younger Democratic Party members are saying. They've been calling for this kind of thing, and Jerry Nadler leading by example, I guess.
Yeah, you look at the average age in the Senate on both sides of the aisle. Folks are reluctant to give up their seats in positions of power. Understandable on one hand, but the argument that we've heard made time and time again is that these folks do need to move aside and allow sort of a new guard to come in and build experience and work their way up through Congress the way these folks did.
Before we go, Megan, I wanted to talk about the amount of time that the president spends on refurbishing the White House. Now, I've been fascinated by this story. Every time we hear something else about what he is doing to the White House, we've got this ballroom, he's been changing the Rose Garden. How much time does this guy actually spend thinking about the actual place where he lives rather than running the country? Taking back to the hours I spent reading this Daily Caller interview today, he takes the journalist outside to view what he calls the presidential wall of fame that he's building in the Rose Garden. And there's going to be lovely black and white portraits of every president going all the way back to George Washington. He says, and I don't know whether he's joking or not, that he's thinking about putting a picture of Joe Biden's auto pen up instead of a picture of Joe Biden. Could he actually do that? Do you think he's serious?
I honestly wouldn't put anything past him. I mean, for any reporter who's, spent any time between upper and lower press, there's a variety of pictures, but the one that comes to mind, there's this picture that the president's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, has posted on social media of the tariff men. And it's this photo sort of photoshopped with Trump. And it's fascinating. You really have to see it. But given that is gracing the halls of the White House, I would not put it past the president to go ahead and do that.
That would be extremely rude, but also I'm sure he would find rather amusing, as would his supporters. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Megan. Do send us your tips, birthdays, spotted moments into playbook@politico.com. That's all we got time for on today's Playbook podcast. We've got much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. And we'll be back tomorrow. Will you be back tomorrow, Megan?
I will be back tomorrow.
Wonderful. I'm so pleased to hear it. All right. We'll see you then. Have a great Tuesday.